So first of all, I'm really glad that we had two speakers who brought you useful information, because I'm pretty much just recruiting for my cult, like this cult of public by default communication. And also, I almost forgot. Hi, everyone watching online. This next slide is the one that nobody really cares about, like who I am. I'll just say it really quick because it's a bit relevant. So I'm Bence Nagy, and I have this position called Software Platform Lead at Kiwi. Just to explain really quick why this is relevant, we have this team called the Platform team. We try to make our developers better at their job. And one of the most frequent things that developers do is communicate. So I kind of have some thoughts about what's efficient communication, and it's kind of part of my responsibilities. All right, so I've been talking about this thing called public by default. What is it, right? I'll just demonstrate how it works in my team. We are using Slack, as probably lots of you. I'm not going to fall into the trap of trying to get the audience to participate, because it really doesn't work in Central Eastern Europe. Basically, we use Slack for communication. We have 2,000, 3,000 employees on Slack. Everyone who works at Kiwi is on Slack, including mostly customer support. But this really doesn't deter us from just communicating everything my team is working on Slack in public channels. So literally anyone from Kiwi can just see what sort of tasks we are working on and how we are solving these tasks. They can see when somebody is providing feedback, whether it's positive or negative. Like in this case, we have some criticism, but whatever, it's just public anyway. And this is, of course, specific to my team. Obviously, as we heard in the previous talk, feedback, even positive feedback, is kind of sensitive to some people. So you might want to consider that. But when you have a team which is OK with it, you just go public by default with feedback as well. All right, so we have literally anything, like status updates about where somebody is going to be working from, or random ideas, or even completely random stuff, organizing a blood donation drive for the 3 people who were actually planning to go. All of it is public by default, which means we never really ask any questions. We intentionally avoid the question, what should we publish to the rest of the company? We just don't ask the question. If you have something happening, you just do it publicly. And of course, we do ask a different question, which is, should this be secret? So we have a couple of things that stay private, like when we are dealing with security issues, which would be super sensitive, or when we are dealing with people's salaries that we don't want to just publish. So we do ask this question, should this be secret? And if we are dealing with something secret, like ranting about stuff going on in our work, that does go into secret space, but this is, let's say, 1 to 5% of our communication. All right, so that's what I'm talking about with public by default. And just so you know what to expect from the next 20 minutes of your life. First of all, I'm currently drafting an article called 13 Reasons to be Public by Default. Because I don't want to bore you to death, I'm only going to be talking about 4 the 4 major points that I think are the most important from this article. The second thing is, because I want to be very fair, and this is often a topic for debating, I will bring up 4 points against public communication, and I will try to explain why I don't think they are good points, of course. And as you can see, I really like these fancy quotes, quote characters, so I guess I'm just going to put some of those up there again. Yeah, all right. I'm going to start out by explaining how I think public communication directly helps the business. And as you can see, basically half the time I was working on this presentation, I was just making random GIFs that go well in the presentation. It's really not a good use of my time, but I did it anyway. Oh, well. So the first direct reason that business is improved by public by default communication is very straightforward. You just spend less time on communicating. To demonstrate with an example, let's say that we have this developer called Amy, and she developed some new feature, and she would like to track how this new feature is doing on your product. OK, so now she needs access to Google Analytics. And the typical thing that happens when people don't have a public by default policy is that Amy will know somebody in the analytics team. So she will go to them and be like, hey, can you give me access? She will send a direct message or a direct email if you're living in the last century. And that person, let's just see what exactly happens. After Amy asks, that person relays to the person, Charlie, who can actually approve this request. Charlie, of course, wants to know why exactly Amy is asking for it. So we have these like communication hops, not in all cases, obviously, but in enough cases that this is a real problem that wastes time. So after the reason is explained, let's see, it's the next day already, and Charlie is now out sick, so we need to do a couple more hops, which is really annoying. We have all of this relaying, this game of telephone, and the messages are just jumping all around people directly. After Eve finally provides access, turns out that she didn't select the correct property, and we need a couple more communication hops. Yeah, I don't need to like explain every single step here because I'm sure you've had cases of miscommunication like this, or just basically cases of inefficient communication. So yeah, this is a big problem what we saw here, because each of these steps adds some time that you're spending communicating. But of course, this is like barely important. It's just like 1 or 2 minutes. The real issue that we have is that each of these steps is adding to the time a person is blocked in their work. And this, while they are waiting for some extra communication hop, this can take from anywhere from like 5 minutes to even several days if they are really unlucky. And finally, what's also really bad is every single step introduces an extra small chance of failure in the communication, like that somebody will relay the wrong message or leave out some important information or anything like that. So my utopic design for communicating, which we use in my team for basically everything, is that we have one central channel, a public channel for requests coming to our team. That's represented in that line, with that line in the middle. And even though we still have all the same problems happening as before, like Charlie is out sick, because all the communication was happening in one single public thread, when somebody new has to join this group, they have all the context already readily available for them. And this, I think, is the most efficient way you can design the communication hops for some requests like this. OK, so now that we see how much fewer communication is really happening here, let's try to calculate the savings, right? And the savings, yeah, I really cannot calculate that. I swear I tried. It was stupid of me, but I was actually like trying to put together some monster equation where I'm like calculating the value of blocked time and how much detriment that brings to projects in the business and all of these things. Then I looked at it and I was like, yeah, this is bullshit. Like, I cannot actually put a number to it. But what I can tell you is that it's definitely going to be less time when your employees or your teammates are just idle and not doing anything, waiting for something to happen. It's definitely going to be basically less time that employees are not doing any useful work, but rather just coordinating communication. Like you could see in that previous diagram where we had this person B, let's say Bob, and he was just relaying messages, which is basically completely wasted work, wasted effort. You don't need to have that at all. And of course, what I can also promise you is that your projects will be delivered faster if you don't need to wait for people who are blocking some sort of progress. OK. I'm just going to jump straight through to reason number 5 from this article that I mentioned before, which is that you end up with better ideas. And what I mean by this is, let's say you're starting out a new project, and you need ideas on how to actually execute that project. So traditionally, one thing you would do is you bring together some sort of brainstorming meeting. And for that, you're going to look at the people available in your team, and you're going to be like, you three, you always have the best ideas. Come with me, and let's try to figure this out. How could you be so sure of yourself, though, that you're choosing the best people to get the best ideas out of your team, right? Or even out of your entire company? Very often, we have different teams that we didn't even realize we're looking at our messages who have better ideas on how to solve things than we did within our team. And this thing where you're with private communication, you're making decisions that you cannot possibly get right, completely right, accurately, perfectly all the time. This is really what I think is the root cause of my entire problem with private communication. So if we want to dig a little deeper in what's causing all the things I'm talking about here, is that humans just suck, basically. We are not able to plan anything perfectly right. And lots of us are engineers who might be dealing with services, I like to think of it as basically a decision is something like a service. When you have lots of interconnected services, you really want to avoid that kind of situation, because you know very well in the back of your head, even though you design something perfect, your services, some of them are going to fail. And the more of them, the more complexity you introduce there, the more failure it's going to be seeing, and the more spectacular it's going to be. It's kind of the same way with decisions. When you tell people that, OK, I'm going to decide how this communication is going to happen, which pieces of information we're going to share, every single micro decision here is a new way to spectacularly fail in what you're trying to share. So I tried to look into how an enterprise company sometimes designs these sort of communication processes. And I found these maps. And what I see on these maps, thankfully none of them are from Kiwi, is that every single arrow here is a 1% chance for failure, for a 1% chance for that not being the best thing to do at that moment. So I kind of feel like we should just let go a bit, let the universe sort things out. We hire tons of people who are very smart, who are able to make good decisions on their own. And one of such decisions is what should I communicate right now, and where should it go? But then, you see, one other problem is that people are also really bad at doing things consistently. Even when somebody would be perfect at their job and their decision-making from within, where they are able to see the best context available in their tasks, people are just committing bad code still, right? You surely are all familiar with the concept of code reviews, which is exactly there because we are always making mistakes. And this is exactly why I like to remove the entire decision of what to make public, and just by default, not letting humans mess up anything that's going on in the universe. Just let the universe sort it out. So that's one of the decisions. And that's kind of like a side note where I went on a meta deep level of what even motivated me to start thinking about this or start talking about this. It's just that humans suck. That's all. All right, let's jump through to something more simple and something more, I guess, easy to explain, which is what sort of value public communication has for people. And this is kind of to be contrasted with the business value I was talking about before. But of course, when you're helping your people individually feel better at their job or individually perform better, that translates to business value. So this line is really blurred between the two. I just wanted to divide into categories because 13 items was really a lot. All right, so reason number 8 from the article is about mental models. And for this, I have somewhat of a game for the audience. But thankfully, you don't actually need to participate more than just think about stuff, because otherwise, yeah, I don't want to do that. Yeah. But for this game, let's just pretend that we are friends, and it's my birthday next week. So you definitely want to get me a present, right? I also graciously drop a hint that I kind of really like those, like those 70s old retro comic books. They are so cool. So you have somewhat of an idea what to do. And you come across this listing on, let's say, Facebook Marketplace. You see somebody selling 6 comic books, and you want to just choose one to get for my birthday. I would like to give you 5 seconds to choose which one you're going to buy. So just try to look at one of them that you're going to get me as a present. And I would say that the best 2 options are these 2 right here. Now, again, I'm not going to ask the audience, because it will surely be awkward, but I bet around half of you, which is a better than random chance, around half of you chose correctly. And that's because of the passive mental models you had from 10 minutes ago. When I showed this GIF of Scrooge McDuck from Donald Duck, I showed you this GIF of a Disney cartoon, which gave you some sort of passive connection in the back of your mind between Disney or these sort of cartoony characters and me. And these sort of things, of course, I've been getting sidetracked here a bit, but it really does matter in the context of a business, because engineers or any sort of creative professional, product managers, any sort of managers, they make tons of tiny decisions day by day in the work they do, in the product they are building. And you want your team to have a good passive understanding. You want your team to have these good mental models of things they didn't actually learn, but they somehow understand, and they are able to make better than random decisions about. So by allowing all information to be public and just having it available for people to look at, to scan through whenever they kind of have their brain turned off and they are not doing anything more important, they kind of gain this passive understanding of what's going on in the rest of the company, of how customers behave and what customers really want. So when they are in a situation when they need to make a tiny decision, a micro decision, let's call it, where no specification is given because we cannot specify every single detail, they are going to make a better decision on average if they have this sort of passive understanding. All right. Let's just jump straight to the last point I want to highlight from the article, which is about psychological safety. So some of you might have heard of Project Aristotle, which is this sort of very pragmatic business research project that Google was doing in-house. Basically, they just got a bunch of academic people who are really good at this sort of research, And I think they were mostly made up of psychologists. And they tried to somehow find correlations between the best teams at Google, the teams that are performing the best, and any sort of attributes that these teams might have. So they wanted to see, if a team is together for 3 years, are they performing better than if they were together only for 1 year, or something like this? And what they found is that the biggest correlation between a team performing well and any attribute of the team is how psychologically safe the team feels. And what this means is basically how afraid they are to bring up some sort of crazy idea, how afraid they are to ask questions. The teams where people are completely trust each other and they have zero fear of looking stupid in front of the others, when they have no fear of being vulnerable in front of their teammates, those were by far the best performing teams at Google. And how does this actually relate to public communication, you might want to be asking. So I searched for a couple keywords on our Slack workspace, on our company chat. And I found that there have been 43,000 instances of people saying sorry, people admitting mistakes publicly and encouraging others to do the same. I also checked a couple other variations, including my fault or my mistake or I hacked up. There was one case of I hacked up. It was me. But the point I'm trying to make here is every time somebody new joins the company and they see that people are all the time just admitting their mistakes everywhere and they are acting vulnerable in front of the entire company, this, of course, incites this psychologically safe behavior or feeling in everyone. So if we want to actually have some sort of a nice metric for this, I counted we have 7.3 SPH, which means sorries per hour in a regular day. I would say that's a pretty good number. And if you look at 7 people saying sorry every hour, okay, obviously you don't because you don't look at all the messages in the Slack workspace, but still, you get my point. All right, so that's the last pro I wanted to mention. And now, again, as I mentioned, I want to be fair to people, so I'm going to bring up some of the concerns that I normally hear. And over the years, I've been a very loud advocate for public communication, so I've had lots of debates with people. I've heard lots of concerns. And I feel like every single time somebody is concerned about public communication, it all comes back to one root cause, which is just the fear they have. And yeah, like, so that's another example of how I'm wasting my time when I'm actually supposed to be preparing for a talk. I spent, I think, like 2 or 3 hours learning how to do motion tracking so I could place public channels in the scene of Bird Box. Definitely not worth the time, but I did it anyway. Anyway, my point here is that this sort of fear is what people, like, you know, it just feels so unnatural. It feels so unfamiliar to communicate in front of 2,000 people, even though like they are not really watching you, but it just feels so unknown. So people are naturally afraid. They are naturally scared to do something that's not in our human instinct of, you know, like private relationships and social connections. But yeah, to be actually much more specific, the first fear that I always hear from people is that we will just end up having these sort of endless discussions. I will suggest something, and 100 people will see it, and everyone will want to comment, and they will just keep asking questions and saying, like, this is not correct, and that's not right. And basically to them, what I have to say is, if you're having this problem, the problem is not with you publishing what you're doing. The problem is that you have weak leadership, because when you are owning some sort of project, if you are the owner, you do have absolute right at any moment to say, I've made my decision. We had this, let's say, even if it's just 2 hours, we had 2 hours of requesting comments from people. I really don't want to spend more time on figuring this out, so I'm making the decision now. If you are a strong leader in this, you really don't have to fear people just slowing down your project. And of course, what you definitely don't want is keep your project private and not hear an actual valid, important concern from people. All right, so let's move on. Fear number 2 is about leaking secrets, meaning something like company strategy leaking out just because there are more people seeing it. But to this, I don't actually have like a concrete counterpoint, I would say. But like, come on, if somebody can join Google as an engineer, and on day 1 they get access to the entire code base, like how bad can it really be? In reality, what I see is there's a super low chance that somebody will want to be malicious. There's a super low chance that they will find the means to be malicious against the company. And even when somebody leaks something, it's really like the problem goes away in like 2 days. I actually cannot really remember any such case, but I know very well, like I've been trying to play with hypothetical scenarios. And if some sort of company secret leaked, it wouldn't be the end of the world, honestly. So this is just something that you don't need to be afraid of, I would say. All right, fear number 3. There's only 2 more left, meaning this is 1, and there's 1 more. So people say that people are wasting too much time reading Slack or reading public communication if everything is available to them, and that it's hurting productivity because they are just not working enough. I feel like the main problem with this argument is that the number of hours you spend at work is not equal to like the amount of creative output you had. I feel like the creative output as an engineer or as a designer, whatever, it's limited, which is why people end up staring at their screens just blankly anyway, or people will go on Reddit, or people will read Facebook or whatever. Because they just reach this sort of threshold of how much output they can have. If your team is motivated, which I know my team is, they are going to want to reach this threshold every single day. And the hours they spend other than that, you know, like it might as well, I would rather have them read Slack and get updates on how the rest of the company is doing than just go on Facebook instead. And the final thing is, people are worried about the overload of information, just having too much content available to be able to make sense of it at all. Like, you might have 1 million messages, and you definitely don't want to be forced to extract the best parts or like the most important parts yourself. It's just like an inhumane task to try to understand and parse all of that information. So As for this fear, what I have to say is that, yeah, like this is actually a problem. I really wish I could say it's not a problem, but just having too much content available for people to be able to parse it and understand it, that is really an issue. But the positive note I have is that this is something that you can solve instead of just avoid. If you have lots of public data, you might want to find some sort of solutions, such as educating people how to write concise and understandable summaries, or investing more in tooling to make searching through all of this data better, because like we have all these computers and everything available at our disposal, so might as well get them to help, sorting through all of this information. And after all, I really think that we saved like tons of time already by having public communication. We already talked about how we are saving time. So definitely some of that we can just use to improve this information overload situation. All right, so let me just summarize real quick. If my clicker wants to cooperate, and it does, awesome. So there's this article I've been hinting at. So again, I haven't actually written it yet, but I have a draft where you can already see the list of certain reasons I have. If you want to check that out, you can access the private draft. Well, it's not really private because I'm sharing with you, obviously. But before it's published on our code.kiwi.com website, you can already read this draft if you're curious. If I manage to actually convince you that public by default is a good way to communicate, I want you to really focus on getting over those fears, the fear of the unknown and the fear of the unnatural kind of communication. And once you're there, you should probably invest some time into fixing this information overload problem. Just find some sort of tooling to sort through the data that is available after you have all these public messages and so on. All right, so that was a talk by me. Thank you.